Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 4th, 2015, end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Going into the weekend here, Claire and I are celebrating our 21st anniversary, and of course, Monday is Pearl Harbor Day, a day that will live in infamosity, and of course, we're going to be devoting a huge part of our Monday show to that particular false flag. And if there's one lesson you should be taking away from all we've been talking about throughout the years, it's the fact that false flags are very common. Government rules you by lies, fraud, and deception, and that's exactly what's going on. Now, next Tuesday, our third-hour guest is going to be Mark Hayward, and he's an entrepreneur out there pushing an idea for portable pallet gardens, and it dovetailed very much with a concept we were talking about a few years ago called guerrilla gardening as a way of just creating free and open shared community food as we head into what appears to be an inevitable major economic crash. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Alrighty, getting on to the news. Obviously today, for the corporate media, there's still San Bernardino, San Bernardino, San Bernardino, San Bernardino, pound, 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 be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, give up your guns, give up your guns. And so we're going to devote a little bit of time to that story, not a whole lot, because there's a lot of other stuff going on that you need to be aware of. But we're going to get started on this. And as far as the independent media is concerned, nobody is buying the official story on San Bernardino. And there's actually some voices even in the corporate media saying, oh, come on, guys, this is getting out of control here. And people are pointing to all these things, the convenient timing that there was a drill already in progress. SWAT was already suited up, ready to go. They were able to set up their command post in less than 90 minutes. Which is amazing when you consider how long it took the government to respond to Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans, almost a week. Now, remember when the shooting first happened, and it was all over the news? The shooters wore GoPro cameras. Witnesses at the scene, at the Inland Regional Center, were saying the shooters were wearing GoPro cameras. Okay, where's the footage? You've got it's gone from 3 to 2 suspects. You've got the 2 suspects, the husband and his wife. Where are the GoPro cameras? And they've changed the story. No. There were no GoPro cameras. Absolutely not. The people who thought they saw, they were seeing reflections and stuff. Because if there had been GoPro cameras found with the bodies, and they didn't show the shooting, that would be the end of the story. So the GoPros have to go away, like the third shooter has gone away. By the way, the initial witness descriptions during the shooting were 3 white males, big guys, body armor and everything. The wife of the couple weighs only 90 pounds. That didn't have the physical strength to be carrying all the weapons it's claimed that she's carrying. I mean, the story really is falling apart. And here's where it gets really interesting. Carly Fiorina was being interviewed on Morning Joe on MSNBC and actually admitted that the accused shooters got the guns they had. At least one of them came from the police department. And obviously a gun ban on civilians isn't going to stop that. How did the gun get from the possession of the police to the accused dead suspects? Now, the story they're running around here today, I mean, there's 2 competing stories. One is that Farouk got into an argument with somebody at the party, left, went home, put on all the body armor, got all the guns, got an explosive device put together, was all set to go, went on back and committed mayhem. Wearing ski masks so nobody would know who they are, even though they were driving a car in Farouk's name. The other story is they're still trying to link this to ISIS in Syria and Muslims and a justification for war. And the story that's been all over the media today is how the female shooter, Tashfeen was her name, pledged allegiance to ISIS on Facebook. And yet they're admitting the Facebook account used a different name, an alias. and was all deleted supposedly the day before the shooting, which sort of contradicts the idea that this was all caused by a workplace argument. Because Farouk worked for the local government. He was at the party by invitation. It was, for him and his family and everybody else's family. So now they're out there. Somebody had a Facebook account under a different name, pledged allegiance to ISIS, and we're just supposed to make that leap that this alias really was Tashfeen and she pledged allegiance to ISIS on Facebook. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, the FBI has come out saying there is no indication that this shooting or these shooters were part of a terrorist network. So we already know somebody's lying somewhere. She pledged allegiance to ISIS and the flag for which it stands, or whatever the heck that nonsense is about. Now, the police are searching for a motive behind the San Bernardino shooting. The FBI has actually admitted that Farouk and his wife were in communication with known jihadis who were being monitored by the FBI. Meaning these guys were probably undercover informants trying to set up another set of patsies for a phony terror arrest, as the FBI has been caught doing repeatedly over the last decade, to keep up the fear, to keep you scared, to keep you clinging to Big Daddy government, save me from the evil terrorists. And we're seeing more and more stories coming out, pointing out, this one's falling apart faster than Boston did. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. We're going to go to Nandy in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm a new listener to your show, but I really like what you do. I love it. I've got two questions for you. The first is regarding the San Bernardino shooting. The pictures of the shooter, they're two different men, and one of them is a guy behind a blue, like a screen, looks like a mugshot. It's not the same as the previous photo. That was like a selfie type of photo, a mirror reflected image. Mm-hmm. You noticed that. It's not the same guy.
Well, I hadn't noticed it, but now that you've mentioned it, I'll go look it down. Here's the point that's missing, okay? There is absolutely zero evidence to support the idea that the three people in body armor and ski masks had anything to do with the husband and wife who wound up dead on the road. We're just supposed to take the government's word on that. And at this point, that's a tall order coming from this government.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the picture of his wife, allegedly, this woman, I think it just started circulating today or last night. This looks to be like a Pakistani, modern Muslim woman, makeup. She's very well-dressed, jewelry. I can't see a woman like that reverting to fanatical Islam.
No, and neither can I, especially with a brand-new baby. Brand-new parents don't go out and do things that make their own offspring an orphan. It's just, this story just does not make any sense. This feels like this was a rush job to get it together, to get Obama off the hook for that stupid statement he made in Paris about only the United States is suffering these shootings. And they were trying to have 3 in one day. And actually, there was another shooting apparently down in New Orleans. We're going to be talking about that. Glenn Beck made a very excellent observation about that other shooting that was going on, okay?
Okay, if you can take to the next question, it was about your exchange with Glenn Greenwald on Twitter.
Yep.
Regarding dancing Israelis. I saw that he apologized to you on your account, but he still hasn't issued a public apology, and I'm really disappointed in him. He also hasn't written an article about it. It seems like he's not studying or researching that incident. I missed his apology on Twitter.
I get flooded with Twitter, and if he apologized, I accept, and we'll go back to being friends, and I'll go back to linking to him. But that's significant, and he's a mensch. What can I tell you if he's going to apologize? Thanks an awful lot. We got to let you go and take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're now getting an update from the FBI because of this absolutely unsupportable story that the wife of Farouk's wife had an aliased Facebook account on which she pledged allegiance to ISIS and then erased it. The FBI is now saying, yes, now we think it's an act of terror. There is absolutely no way to know who set up that Facebook account under an aliased name. But everybody, they're making up this story with a dartboard. It's changing so much. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call here. Ty in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ty, are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing him. I'm going to put you back on hold, and hopefully we'll come back to you a little bit later. Now then, article coming out of DaveandChad.com, San Bernardino drills third shooter and other weird stuff. And it's talking about how all the witnesses were saying 3 shooters, white males. And all of a sudden it became 2 shooters, husband and wife, with a brand new baby. There was a third person arrested, who was then very quietly released. No information about that. We saw the same thing at Columbine. Following that shooting, which was blamed on these 2 students who were out of their heads on prescription antidepressants, there were 3 other people arrested and then quietly released. Now, Saeed Farouk worked for San Bernardino County. He was also an ecologist, a registered Democrat. His hobby was working on classic cars. His brother is a decorated Navy veteran. And apparently, they stopped attending the mosque 2 years ago. They just don't fit the profile. These 2 were set up to be patsies. It's amazing. All righty, let's see. The family, of course, is saying it just doesn't seem plausible. These are not people who would do something like this. They don't believe the official account of the San Bernardino massacre. And they were even quoted saying they have doubts about all these other things, like Sandy Hook. And of course the media say, oh, please, people, how could they doubt the official story about Sandy? How could you possibly doubt the word of the government? It's easy. History shows all rulers lie to their people to control them, especially when it comes to taking away your freedoms or starting wars. Tony Blair's dodgy dossier, plagiarized from an outdated student thesis, Saddam's nuclear weapons, the Lusitania not carrying weapons, Reichstag fire, Gleiwitz incident, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. How many times do you have to be lied to until you understand? You live under a government that lies to you. And more people do understand that. And that's why the government, both here in the U.S. and U.K. and many other places around the world, find themselves with a huge credibility problem. Nobody trusts them. And they did it to themselves by decades and decades of endless lying to get what they want. And now they're whining and crying, nobody trusts us. Well, I don't have any sympathy for you. You did it to yourselves. Now, from the point of view of the government, the corporate media, they're saying, that independent media, they're harming the trustworthiness of the government and the corporate media. No, we're not. You did it when you lied. We caught you at it. But if you weren't lying in the first place, there's nothing we could say that would harm your credibility or trustworthiness. We wouldn't even be doing this. If we had a corporate media that we actually knew for a fact was being a truthful watchdog on government abuse and telling us the truth about things like the Gulf of Tonkin, Havana Harbor, Vince Foster, I wouldn't be doing this. There's a lot of other things I'd rather be doing than running this website, doing this radio show. But as long as we have a government and a corporate media that goes on lying to us the way they do, I'm going to be here. All right, let's see. Looks like Ty from Texas finally got back to us. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Let me hopefully say something that's accurate here, at least my understanding. I'm hearing people say that these guys were in possession, or these 2, or whoever it was in possession of military or police issue guns. Is that
At least one of the rifles was initially sold by the manufacturer to the police department. And they don't know how it got from the police department to being in this guy's van. Big mystery on that one. Now, these guns that were being shown on TV have been heavily modified, and they are already illegal under California law. because they matched the description of an assault rifle. They've got the multiple rails on the barrel. They've got the pistol grip. They've got, high-capacity magazines, all these things that declare them to be assault rifles, and they're already illegal. So more gun laws are not going to change anything at all.
Well, here's what I know is I can go down to Academy Sports and Outdoors right now. I can pick up a Smith & Wesson M&P AR.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I'm in Texas and not California, so I get the difference there. I just want to make sure we're not getting things confused out there in the public. I didn't understand that fact you mentioned, but people seem to think that if it's Smith & Wesson and has an M&P stamp on it, that it's a military or police issue weapon by proxy, and that's not the case.
No, I know that. In fact, I don't think these look more like AR-15 variants. They're claiming one of them was modified to fire automatic but wouldn't. And there are legal ways to do that with a grip that the entire receiver floats on. And if you just put just the right pressure on the trigger, the recoil of the gun will recycle it. And there's all kinds of things that you can do. But the fact of the matter is that, at least one of the weapons originated within the police department, so a gun ban on civilians isn't going to stop that. These guns were already technically illegal under California law. But everybody's out there saying we've got this horrible tragedy and we've got to take the guns away from the rest of America. Well, I got a news headline for you. Today, 250 million gun-owning Americans did not go on a shooting rampage today. And as I pointed out, and I drew a lot of flack for this, more people in this country are killed with baseball bats than assault rifles. But nobody's talking about banning the game of baseball, which is pretty useless. They're just running in circles, right? But that's it. And you know what's really weird? Every time there's a terror attack, we're being told by the pro-immigration people, you shouldn't blame all Muslims for the crimes of a deranged few. I think America's gun owners deserve that same break, but we're not getting it.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I will be not interested to see, but I think we would agree that we don't see these wind-ups coming to gun-free states like Texas. And if they do, I'm imagining that the result might be a little different.
Oh, sure. I mean, this happened in a gun-free zone. Whoever was behind this knew that nobody there was going to fire back at them. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back with another phone call in a couple of minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I know we got two calls waiting. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but I got to cover this story right now. CNN literally ransacked the home of the two suspects, who are now dead and cannot speak on their own behalf. And CNN, media, and families of the victims were allowed into the apartment. The landlord got a crowbar, broke the lock. There is no indication the police had actually released the scene yet. Now, I've seen a few crimes during my lifetime, and normally all of the locations where the suspects or the victims were are usually closed off for weeks in case somebody needs to come back and do another forensic test. But CNN, with this landlord, broke the door open, went in with the cameras. Everybody's touching everything. And they're playing it up for the horror of what was done, the horror that was done. And in the process, of course, they've hopelessly contaminated the scene for any evidentiary purposes. If there is anything in the home that actually exonerates the couple, it's just going to be dismissed. Oh, one of the crowd that came in with CNN planted it, or somebody touched it and changed it. They're erasing all the evidence, just like after 9/11, where all the steel got shipped to foreign countries, except for that little bit they kept for the bow of the ship. Or Oklahoma City bombing, where the building was demolished and the wreckage buried in an undisclosed location. Or Waco, where they bulldozed the entire site down 6 inches of soil and took that away and buried it in an undisclosed location. Same thing with Vince Foster. They completely changed the landscaping where his body was found to destroy any possibility of anybody finding something that contradicts the official story. And the fact that they're doing that is another reason why we don't trust that official story. All right, let's grab a couple more phone calls here. We're going to grab ourselves Dan in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Michael. I just wanted to give you my take on this, on the San Bernardino shooting. I'm actually sitting right now in Redlands in my office, and I'm probably about a half a mile away from where that house was torn apart. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an idea. Anyhow, on Wednesday, about 12:15, my daughter got a text saying there's been a shooting down on Waterman and Orange Show. So anyhow, I told my wife, I said, maybe we should go and look and see what's going on over there. I said, but they probably won't let us in. Anyhow, so my wife, my daughter, and I, we drove over there. We parked probably a quarter mile away from where it's at, just right around the corner on Vanderbilt and Waterman Avenue. I'm very familiar with this area. I drive by this building probably twice a month on my normal route. Anyhow, it was, we were there about 45 minutes. We watched as the ambulances were coming in and they were backing into position nice and neat. I think there was 21 ambulances total by the time we left, but they weren't doing anything. They were backing in. They had their lights on and then there was fire equipment there. They were backed in nice and neat, but there was no sense of urgency at all. There were people mulling about, walking all around. It looked like it was a drill. It looked like a drill. People were walking around. They were walking up towards where the event happened, and the police weren't stopping them. There were cars driving through. It was just, it wasn't what I would have expected. I would have expected if there was an active shooter on the loose, they would have cordoned off the area and they wouldn't let anybody near. But people were walking about and talking to each other. And
well, it's kind of interesting because when the gunfire started, some of the people inside that Inland Regional Center were texting out, "The drill has started."
That's right. Now, and then here's another thing. I'm just telling you what I reported or what I saw, that when we pulled up, we parked in this parking lot. There's like an office complex right here. But anyhow, there was another car parked there with a lady inside. We got out and we were standing on the sidewalk looking. She got out and she was kind of in tears. And so we went over and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she says, I work over there. I work over there. I was heading back to the office and my friends told me there were 3 or 4 gunmen in there shooting. And so anyhow, that's what she said, and she was kind of broken up. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, so we just kind of left her there. She was kind of crying. I'm not sure what was going on with that. But anyhow, then another woman pulled up maybe 25 minutes after we were there, and she hugged the other woman, and they were both kind of, crying together. I'm not sure if they were in there and they let them go, but anyhow, I thought that was odd. And then, but anyhow, the whole thing looked like a drill from where I stood. They were. There was, no urgency at all. Everybody was calm. It was very calm and collected. The ambulances were backing in nice and slow. There was a guy guiding them back, and they were backed in nice and neat. So, anyhow, then the other thing I wanted to bring up, I was listening to Joyce Riley this morning, and she brought something up with Chris Cuomo. I don't know if you're aware of this. This is like a bombshell. Chris Cuomo was interviewing the 2 lawyers for the family. Yes. But anyhow, she said, the lawyer said, from their understanding, they found the two suspects handcuffed face down in the SUV.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one. The family's lawyer has mentioned that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, And so, but anyhow, I looked it up on CNN. The clip's still up there. It's still up there.
Yeah, we linked to it.
Oh, you do? Okay, great.
Yeah, we did.
But anyhow, I looked up that law firm, and it looks like a pretty reputable outfit. So, but anyhow, this whole thing is, I think it's fallen apart before their very eyes.
Yeah, it really is. In the 1950s, 1960s, it would have worked. They didn't have to be careful back then because everybody trusted the media to be truthful, and everybody thought the government was the good guys. That world is gone, and they don't really seem to have quite conceptually grasped that just yet. Anyway, listen, Dan, I need to let you go. We've got another caller I want to get to before the commercial break. Thank you for the call, and we're going to switch over here to Randy in Texas. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you done stole my thunder again.
Oh, sorry about that.
Going to ask about why they were opening up a crime scene and letting everybody go in and compromise it.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And even the corporate media is saying, there's no indication that the police, had cleared the unit, to be released. And again, if you look at normal procedure in any kind of a murder or crime case, the locations that are key to the investigation are kept sequestered and isolated for weeks in case somebody gets into the lab and says, this isn't making sense. We need to go back to the crime scene and check for why. And so for CNN to talk this landlord into opening the door with a crowbar breaking on in with the families of the victims. I mean, obviously this is, the families are upset, the horror, and it probably made for really good television, but at the same time, of course, they've completely contaminated the scene, even if there's something in there that exonerates the Farouk couple. It's just going to be dismissed. Oh, somebody brought it in when the CNN, people. It's their way of destroying the evidentiary value of the site.
Yes, well, I've been a landlord before, and usually I had a spare key for the properties that I rented.
That is a very good point, because many, many years ago when my parents owned an apartment building, and I worked as their manager for free, under the law, the landlord has copies of the keys to your unit.
That's correct. So why did he have to use a crowbar?
Because it's dramatic. It's visually impressive.
Bingo.
Yes. All right, well, listen, Randy, we're out of time. I got to let you go. We got to take another break for some of our commercials, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. Now, over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain, they have just put up a story regarding the death of Saeed Farouk, and it is illustrated with a photo of Farouk lying on the ground dead in a pool of blood, and his hands are still handcuffed behind him. Now, the family lawyer is saying that he was told by a source in the police that both Farouks were found in the SUV, lying face down, hands handcuffed behind them, and they were already dead at that point. The story is beginning to fall apart. The official story is Farouk died in a hail of gunfire in a shootout with police. Well, if you have killed somebody in a gun battle, you don't bother putting handcuffs on them. There's not really much point to it. Now, this story in the the Daily Mail, actually has a headline that Mrs. Farouk pledged allegiance to ISIS on Facebook during the slaughter of 14. Now, there's two problems with that. If she's posting to Facebook during the slaughter, then she is not there pulling the trigger. Second, the story of Mrs. Farouk posting Pledge of Allegiance was originally that she did it a few days before and then deleted it all the day before the shooting. The story just doesn't make any sense. They're thrashing around trying to find something people can grab onto, and the more they do that, the more we're turning away and saying, this is absolute, complete, utter nonsense. Somebody sent me the YouTube video of where CNN just walked into the house, the Farouk house, and they got cameras, they're touching everything, they're moving everything, they have contaminated the crime scene, and I think that's why they did it. If there is something in that home that exonerates the Farouks, it'll just be dismissed, oh, somebody planted it. Somebody came in with the CNN crew. I think it's actually illegal to enter a crime scene that the police have not released yet. I think somebody on that CNN crew ought to go to jail. Now, proving that everybody is taking advantage of this horrible tragedy to push their agenda, and I am not kidding you. According to the White House spokesperson, Barack Obama is of the opinion that if guns are banned for law-abiding Americans, it will cut down on terror attacks in the United States. Now, he could be correct, since it appears all these terror attacks are staged false flags by the government to push the gun grab agenda. But for anybody who thinks the government is still on the up and up, it makes absolutely no sense at all. One of the shooters in San Bernardino got their rifle from the police. And remember, Paris has very strict gun control laws. Nobody's allowed to have a gun. And the shooters there were using military weapons, firing 3-round bursts. But this tells us all of these horrible, tragic shootings are being done to push the gun grab agenda. And when you look at the scale of lies that this government is capable of over the history, shooting up a party in San Bernardino, that's nothing. You know, bombing a marathon in Boston, that's nothing. It's just the cost of doing business. This government will gladly murder 5% of the American population if it makes the other 95% willing and obedient slaves. It's a numbers game. Meanwhile, Obama and everybody else is making a huge thing about San Bernardino. Chicago's had 2,700 killings. Nobody's up there talking about that. Why? Well, because Chicago has strict gun control. We can't talk about all the people being killed in Chicago. It undermines the article of faith that gun laws will make everybody safe. And it really doesn't work. Now then, there was actually a shooting also down in New Orleans. Glenn Beck caught this one. Over 20 people were injured, some of them children. And it got zero media coverage because the shooter is black. And in the politically correct media world, we're going to say all kinds of bad things about white people, but we can't talk about black people doing this sort of thing. That would be racist. We don't want to be called racist, so we're not going to pay attention when the perpetrators of these crimes are black. Another very brilliant article. Do mass killings bother you? And it starts out talking about young man had successfully killed on a large scale, went to his religious leader with his doubts, and was told that mass killing was part of God's plan. And the young man continued killing until he just got sick of it and quit. 1,626 lives. And the young man was Brandon Bryant, and he was working as a drone pilot for the U.S. Air Force. He was given an award for murdering 1,600 people. And yes, the Christian chaplain told him, killing these innocent people is part of God's plan. Well, if we're supposed to be upset over what happened in San Bernardino, why are we not equally upset over what our government is doing in countries all around the world? We should be. If we believe in justice, we should be just as upset over the mass murder being committed by the government as mass murder committed by anybody else, because a death is a death is a death is a death. Now, apparently, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who herself carries concealed, is trying to sneak gun control amendments into the bill that's going to repeal Obamacare. That looks like that's going to go through. So everybody's piling on. I want this amendment. I want this amendment. And in the blueprint for the New America, there's an ironclad rule that all bills before the legislative body are for one purpose and one purpose only. You can't stick 47 completely unrelated things in there to ride through on the coattails of a must-pass bill, because in that lies some of the greatest legislative evils of this government. I did repost my article. Actually, it wasn't originally my article, but I was allowed to mirror it. 42 false flag attacks officially admitted to, and for every false flag that is officially admitted to, we can probably presume that there's 1,000 out there still being covered up and hidden. All right, enough about San Bernardino. We got to get over to the war zones. There's a lot going on, and it's not being covered in the corporate media. Now, the Ministry of Defense has gone on the war path against David Cameron's new version of the dodgy dossier, where Cameron is claiming there are 70,000 anti-ISIS fighters in Syria, and the Ministry of Defense said, no, there are not. But Cameron went ahead and used it anyway. Just like when George W. Bush made that claim about Iraq was buying yellow cake uranium from Niger, even though the evidence was clearly fraudulent. But he used it anyway. It sounded good. It'll help us sell the war. Anything that sells the war is good. I don't care if it's true or not. Truth is not an issue. Getting the war is the issue. But everybody's thrashing about and lying. There's a Tory member of Parliament who voted in favor of bombing Syria, and her name is Lucy Allen. She's 51. She got an email from a voter that was very critical of the vote. Lucy added the phrase, unless you die, into the constituent's email and then reported it as a threat, a death threat. But checking the records on the computers. Investigators found the edit. Now she's in trouble, and she should be. Germany is sending 1,200 support troops to Syria. They're only there for support. Yes, they look like soldiers. They got guns. They got things that go bad, but they're only there for support. They're advisors. They're trainees. They're there for support. Anyway. The U.S. aircraft carrier Harry Truman is now in the Mediterranean, approaching the Syrian coast. Everybody's piling on there. Over in Arizona, U.S. Representatives Matt Salmon and Trent Franks are out there saying Congress needs to authorize a war on ISIS. And they specifically mention the Paris attacks, why we have to go to war against Syria. They want a war on ISIS in Syria, even though the actual Paris attackers weren't Muslim. They were drinking, doing drugs, doing nude selfies, and they all had EU passports. They're just out there pushing. They want a war. Okay, Matt, Trent, here are your rifles, here are your parachutes, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit. Go and have fun. We'll be back after the news and commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, the Russian foreign minister is proposing a plan to work with the Kurdish to help close Syria's border with Turkey. That's what they want to do, is absolutely shut it off. So terrorists and weapons cannot come from Turkey into Syria, and Syria's oil cannot flow back into Turkey. That's why everybody is upset with Russia right now. They're spoiling the little game they had going on. So possibly in response to this development, Turkish troops are now inside Iraq near Mosul. About 1,200 Turkish troops, and the official story from Turkey is they're there as trainers. They're there as advisors. And they're not cooperating with the Americans or anybody else. I think they're there to launch a war on the Kurds, which has been on Erdogan's radar for quite a long time. And if the Kurds and Russians are working together and Turkey attacks the Kurds, there you go. And maybe this is Turkey's plan. Turkey wants something to happen that can make Russia look like they're the bad guy and get this world war going. Now, Representative Tulsi Gabbard here in Hawaii is still out there making the rounds saying this could trigger a nuclear war. And she's absolutely right. Because America's military stockpiles are drawn down. Some of the stuff they're sending to support Poroshenko in Kiev are 20 and 30 years old, worn out. They're just one step above scrap metal. Russia hasn't been fighting wars for the last 14 years. They've got huge stockpiles. They're building efficient, cost-effective, inexpensive weapons, standing in contrast to these endless boondoggles coming out of the U.S. military-industrial complex, like the F-22, the F-35, the Gerald Ford, the Independence-class littoral ships, and on and on and on and on. And on the day, if this war gets going, and it looks like they're going to get it going, maybe even before Christmas, on the day when Washington, D.C. realizes they cannot defeat Russia and China with a conventional force, they will start turning those little brass keys in the silos. We're trying to get Tulsi Gabbard to come on the show and talk about it. We're starting to see some members of the political class show some spine and really talk about their honest opinion about things. We had that with Senator Black the other day. Tulsi Gabbard's another one, the new generation coming on, the new Ron Pauls, the new Cynthia McKinneys. We have to applaud and support them. All right, we're getting a report that Iran's Air Force is going to enter the Syria conflict, again, at the invitation of Syria's legitimate government. And apparently Russia is providing Syria's government with S-300 aerial defense systems. Now, the S-400s are under the control of the Russian forces. These are the last generation S-300s, which Russia's just going to give to Assad and say, you put them where you think you need to put them. Now, up in Afghanistan, the head of the Afghan militia is asking for Russia's help against ISIS. So this thing is ballooning out of control. Now, there's a very interesting story that came out of LiveLeak. Israel is not allowed by Russia to bomb in Syria. They've done it a couple of times, sneaking in and sneaking out. But apparently some sharp-eyed observers over in Israel have noticed the Israeli media are writing absolutely bogus, fake stories in the domestic media to try and keep the idea going that Israel is somehow relevant to what's going on. But Israel does not want to go on in there. They're very concerned about Russia's excellent air defense system. And in fact, according to a story over at Zero Hedge, Israel is now conducting training exercises to train their pilots how to evade and deal with Russia's air defense systems. And remember, what's driving all of this, as far as Syria and Israel, is that Golan Heights, which is Syria's property, including the oil and gas under it, but Israel wants it, Israel covets it. Israel's trying to get the world, even the United States, to recognize the annexation, meaning theft, of the Golan by Israel, and even the U.S. says we can't do that. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Sunny in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Sibel Edmonds, in interviews and in her book, used to talk about how Denny Hassert, who just was in trouble for pedophilia, he sold nuclear technology to the Turks.
Yes.
And I think that's why Rodin is, acting all tough, because he has them. He's ready to go to nuclear war. He wouldn't be this brazen with Russia if he didn't.
Well, no. The reason Erdogan is being this brazen with Russia is he knows he's got all of NATO and the United States behind him. Erdogan's job, is to get this war going, and then the U.S. and NATO will come in and the war will be against NATO and Russia, and Erdogan will sit back and count whatever it was he was paid to do this little bit of dirty work, and smile to himself.
That's crazy. Hey, Mike, one different question. You ever going to do your old theme song for What Really Happened? Once in a while, it's like an accordion type deal. I love that song.
Okay, well, I'll think about putting it back into the rotation. All of the main themes for the radio show are of course, creations of my lovely wife, the Lady Claire. And if you go to WRHradio.com, that's the website specific to the radio show from my end. Obviously, GCN Live has the other one. But at WRHradio.com, midway down the page, there's a link that takes you to a player where all of the music used in the show is there, including all of the original themes, and you can click on them and listen to them. And in the case of artists who very graciously granted us permission to use their music for bumpers, there are links to their websites, so you can go on out and visit their websites and see what they're up to.
All right, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to get letters from the PC crowd about, you can't say Merry Christmas. Yeah, I can. First Amendment. Merry Christmas. Deal with it. Story coming out of WakeUpFromYourSlumber.com. Mossad accelerates its strategy against BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Movement. The reason Israel is losing this one is because the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement is not a single group with a hierarchy. There are no leaders. It's a leaderless protest against Israel's abuse of the Palestinian people. There are some individuals who draw a lot of focus, but overall, BDS is a diffuse and broad movement based on popular opinion about what's going on. And that's why Israel can't find a handle with which to try and take control of it. See, when you're dealing with the government, all you got to do is bribe the people at the top, and you've got the entire country at your beck and call, as AIPAC has proved with the United States Congress. But when it's a populist movement, where it's just millions and millions of people saying it's time for this to stop, and they're not following anybody's instructions or anything, they just go to a store and say, I don't want to buy anything from the illegal settlements. Anyway, story coming out of Activist Post. Bilal Erdogan, the real ISIS oil minister. More evidence is surfing that Erdogan's son is the key figurehead in stolen Syrian oil being shipped by ISIS to Turkey and then resold across the world. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting on back to Turkey and Erdogan. As you know, when Russia first came out with the accusation that Syrian oil stolen by ISIS was being sold through Turkey, Erdogan came out with the "how dare you" defense and declared that if Russia was able to prove that, he would resign. Russia's, of course, proven it many times over. Other sources have documented it as well. And, of course, Erdogan has no plans to resign. He lied to everybody. Imagine my shock. Now, Erdogan is cracking down on the Turkish media, shutting down anybody who is questioning his wisdom, his authority, the wars itself. Erdogan is trying to put this guy in prison for 2 years for a single tweet asking if Erdogan looked like the character Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. Now, that's clearly the sort of behavior one sees in a tyrant. And yet, to the U.S. government and the corporate media, Bashar al-Assad is the dictator. And the double standard is becoming very, very obvious because all of these leaders the U.S. has gotten rid of over the years, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, now they're going after Assad. These are elected leaders who were well liked by their people because they were running their nations for the benefit of their own people and not for Western corporations. Now, Assad won his last re-election by a huge margin that American politicians can only dream of, except possibly Trump. His numbers continue to grow. International observers were allowed to watch the Turkish elections and declared them open, free, and fair. They don't let anybody watch America's elections. It's all hidden away behind Voters' News Service and inside the software on those electronic machines that nobody's allowed to examine. You know, most Americans don't understand, don't realize there is no oversight of our congressional presidential elections. There's no citizens committee, there's no governmental committee. It's all run by a privately owned company that's owned by the TV networks and a couple of key newspapers called Voters' News Service. And there's no double check on them, whether they're being truthful. And they have been caught changing the results of elections in the past. So, we have the U.S. government declaring Syria's Assad as a dictator. Syria has women's right and religious freedom written into its constitution. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is calling as their friends Saudi Arabia and Qatar with their autocratic hereditary rulers. Anyway, story coming on out of Fars News, the ISIS war U.S. claim has never stood up to basic scrutiny. And they're pointing out that every time the U.S. says they're going to war against ISIS, they somehow miss ISIS and they bomb the infrastructure of the nation they're targeting. ISIS is just a scarecrow. They put them up there and say, oh, we got to get ISIS. Sorry about the hospital. Sorry about the oil refinery. Sorry about the factory. Sorry about the roads and the power station and the water supply and everything. But we had good intentions. We were trying to get those gosh darn ISIS terrorists. And then, of course, Russia comes in, and in the space of a little over a month, shows how really easy it would have been for the U.S. to get ISIS if the U.S. had actually been trying to get ISIS. Now, with U.S. help, Saudi Arabia is continuing to obliterate Yemen. We're going to teach those gosh darn Yemeni people they're not allowed to choose their own government. They're not allowed to kick out the installed U.S. puppet regime. Don't you understand the rules that we just made up? And a lot of civilians are being killed there. But nobody in the media is anywhere near as outraged about that as they are about San Bernardino. Oh, San Bernardino is horrible. And it is horrible. We're not going to take anything away from that. But so are all the innocent civilians being killed by U.S. drone strikes into countries we're not technically at war with. All the people tortured by the United States government, some of them to death, to find nuclear weapons in Iraq that turned out not to exist. That is horrific, and we should be angry about that. Now, up in Ukraine, Kiev forces shell 2 villages in the Donetsk Republic, violating the ceasefire. And basically what they're doing is they're starting to bring troops and heavy artillery, heavy weapons, tanks, down to the border of Crimea. They're going to make a move. They want Crimea back from Russia. To heck with what the Crimean people want. The issues here are too important to leave up to the Crimean voters. They don't know they're supposed to want to live in slavery to the European Central Bank. Now then, getting back to the Pentagon and waste, and there's a huge amount of waste. I mean, let's be honest. If you had that kind of money hanging around there, you'd be reckless with it too. We're talking about that gas filling station that they built for something like 10 times what it should have cost. And now there's another one. Apparently, up in Afghanistan, the Pentagon spent $150 million on luxury villas for their employees in Afghanistan. Now, these employees normally would be living on U.S. military bases in the barracks. But according to SIGAR, the Pentagon spent $150 million on this. And I saw a photo of the place. It looks like a luxury resort. And there are all kinds of freebies and stuff going on. Meanwhile, story coming out of SR Bin, the Pentagon is in a panic over Russia's recent successful test of a satellite killer missile. The opening shots of World War III are probably going to be fought up in high orbit. And I'm very concerned about that, because when you have an air war going on and one plane shoots down another plane, the burning bits all fall to the ground and that's the end of it. But when you blast something apart in orbit, much of that debris just goes into other orbits and starts interfering with other satellites. And you could literally trigger a cascade effect of satellites destroying other satellites that were not targets, and that debris goes out and destroys more satellites, and we could literally encase the Earth in this giant orbiting shrapnel field, which means we won't be able to do space missions any longer. We won't be able to get through. And I'm very much opposed to taking war out into orbit because of the long-range problems it will create. Unfortunately, those who want war never think long-range. That's why they're perfectly willing to shower Iraq with depleted uranium. Once the victory is assured, it's not their problem anymore. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, if you are my age and you remember Vietnam, you'll remember the history of what eventually became the M16 or the AR-15. It is a very good weapon design. And it has been the foundation for a lot of other weapons that have been built on that basic plan. It's good engineering by Armalite. But there was a big scandal because there was a lot of Pentagon brass who were financially involved with the company producing the M14. And they kept insisting, we want the M14, not the M16, because the M14 is using exactly the same ammunition as the M30 machine gun, and therefore logistics will be simpler, which was kind of a thin excuse. So they were evaluating the M16, and they put it out in the field in Vietnam, and a lot of the soldiers got killed. And they found those soldiers dead with the M16 disassembled, trying to clear a jam. And the Pentagon said, see, got to go with the M14. Investigation showed that the Pentagon had loaded the cartridges for the test guns with the wrong propellant. And they used a propellant that was going to foul and jam the weapon because they wanted it to look bad. They wanted to go with the M14. Congress finally intervened, had their own evaluations, which proved the M16 was the superior design, as history has validated. And it seems the United States is not the only military with these kinds of problems, because I just put up a flashback story from earlier in the year where the German Defense Ministry has stopped all orders of the Army's current standard automatic rifle, the Heckler & Koch G36. Apparently, it was the subject of a lot of complaints from the troops in the field who said it isn't accurate, it doesn't meet our needs. And apparently they held an investigation and found out, by golly, it's not the weapon they thought it was. It was politicked into purchase so that somebody could make money. And you know what's really alarming? And Harry Truman was dealing with the same thing going into in the years before World War II. The people who are selling these weapons don't care if they really work or not. They just want to sell them. And they're perfectly okay with our sons and daughters going into combat situations with weapons that might not work. They don't care. It's not their kids. They just want the money. Now, we are hearing the Pentagon start to complain about how they're burning through their Hellfire and bomb stockpiles going after ISIS. Apparently, the Air Force has fired more than 20,000 missiles and bombs against ISIS. Remember what I said earlier about how the U.S. stockpiles are dwindling? And of course, what the Pentagon is really saying is, you, the American people, have to come up with more money. We need to buy more missiles and more bombs. Make the defense contractors rich. Wouldn't the low-cost option be to sit back and let Russia finish the job against ISIS? They're doing a good job. And here we have Ash Carter saying that, we're going to be in Syria for years. We're going to be dropping far more. But it's all about grinding money out of you for these weapons to go bang. And also, for those of us old enough to remember Vietnam, the constant missions by the Navy to bomb suspected truck parks, which inevitably turned out to be completely empty fields being blown up. Why? Because you had to buy more bombs. And you made more money in the defense contracts. And the American people got stuck with the bill until finally they all united together, despite the interference coming from COINTELPRO, and said, this is going to stop. Now, so far this year, 2015, the U.S. military has been running special operations in 147 countries. That's almost 3/4 of the entire planet. And yet they're out there screaming about Russian aggression. The U.S. military is conducting operations on 3/4 of the globe right now. But Russia's the aggressor. Russia's the bad guy. Alrighty, let's see. Now we're getting another Bex alert. We've had a wonderfully produced, high dynamic range professional video of some representatives of ISIS with the little bug up there, the waving ISIS flag, and professional graphics and editing. Feels like another Rita Katz production. And ISIS is threatening to explode New York, Washington, and Moscow. We're coming to get you. Keep the terror going on up. Another fine production by Site Intelligence Group. And let's see. Now, over in the European Union, we're starting to segue into the economic news. Over in Denmark, they had a referendum over whether Denmark should get closer to the European Union or not. And it was an overwhelming defeat, a rejection of involvement in the European Union. The Danes understand the EU is starting to collapse. And from the very same factors that are going to collapse the U.S. Predatory economics by private central banking and open borders, further exacerbating the hardship and poverty of the people. They don't want to have anything to do with it. Now, here in the United States of America, because of student loans and the inavailability of high-paying jobs with which to pay those loans, more and more young people, even post-college, are still living at home with their parents. Record numbers of people who should be out in the world with an apartment, if not a home, and a job, they're still living with their parents. Now, what's really interesting is right now, young men are living with their parents at a 75-year record high. They've almost matched the record high that was set 75 years ago when they first started keeping records at the end of the Great Depression. That should tell you something. Apparently, Puerto Rico is getting ready for a default. Mexico bracing for massive default. And yes, they did get their traditional Friday happy ending on the American stock market from all that massaging. But we know it's all rigged and it's all fraud, and the stock market does not reflect the health or lack thereof of the general economy for ordinary Americans. It's a money junkies game. It's a giant open-air casino for the money junkies to play in. And it's got nothing to do with the economy of Main Street, USA. Now, Marco Rubio is back out on the campaign trail, and he's made a comment, Israel is everything we want the Middle East to look like in the future. I posted one of the pictures of the dead Palestinians killed by Israel, and I'm saying, is that what you have in mind, Marco? You want the entire Middle East to look like what's going on in the occupied territories in Gaza? Because the good part of Israel is all bought and paid for by U.S. tax dollars. So you're now saying that the American taxpayer has to rebuild the Middle East after we're stuck with the bill for blowing it all to rubble in the first place? Now, Judicial Watch has filed another lawsuit against the U.S. Treasury Department for all the records on Hillary Clinton's Russian uranium scandal. She's got another one that's coming out of the woodwork. Another one of these little questionable deals that seem to be lubricated with donations to the Clinton Charitable Foundation. Another interesting effect here over at Christians. Oh, got to take a break here. We'll be right back with more politics and corruption. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to politics and corruption, Fox News has been running the press conference by the Farouk family attorney. I have to tip my hat to Fox. They're giving him a lot of uninterrupted airtime to talk, and he made several very good points about the lack of actual evidence that the Farouks were the people actually at the center. And then he's gone on to basically try and shout down all this stuff about blame the Muslim, by making the point, were those kids at Columbine Muslim? The guy at Sandy Hook, was he Muslim? And he's saying, Muslims condemn this kind of activity. But the whole point of a false flag is to demonize an entire group of people in order to make them targets. Hitler did it with the Jews. Every tyrant needs a targeted scapegoat group. For the Nazis, it was the Jews. For the American warmongers, it's the Muslims. Other points in history, it's been the Christians. They don't really care who they target as long as it's somebody who can't really fight back. So, anyway, getting on back to politics and corruption. Very interesting article over in the Christian Science Monitor, The Adelson Effect. Sounds like something you should get in Physics 101. And basically saying every single GOP candidate is showing up there because Adelson spent $90 million on GOP candidates in 2012. And everybody is lining up for their share of the trough in 2015. Going into 2016. Now, Donald Trump was speaking to a Jewish group the other day, courting their support, but he actually had some very honest words to say about the peace process and how it's time that this whole situation finally get resolved. Meanwhile, speaking of Adelson, a court has ordered Netanyahu to divulge information about his relationship with Sheldon Adelson because there are indications, certainly that Adelson's newspaper, Israel Hayom, is a quasi-official mouthpiece of Netanyahu. And I think the American people need to understand, if it transpires, Sheldon Adelson is acting as an instrument of Netanyahu in this country, which is not going to come as a surprise when you look at the behavior of AIPAC. I think the American people need to understand that, and just how much of our government is gladly for sale to foreign influence. Now, there are laws that are supposed to prevent that, but as is the case with all politically corrupted structures, they find ways around it. Back in 1995, Bill Clinton was authorizing the transfer of that high technology with military applications to Chinese companies, and Chinese money was pouring into his re-election campaign. Now, it didn't come directly from China. It was routed through Chinese-American citizens, which technically made it legal, but it later came out much of that money was coming from Chinese intelligence agencies. And we still need to find out if Hillary Clinton was doing that again, selling American secrets on that weak private email server and using the charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. That's a question that nobody seems to want to ask. Nobody in the corporate media is even breathing a word of that. Now, down in Louisiana, a little bit of good news for those people worried about police brutality. 4 prison officers, technically prison guards, not really street officers, have been charged in the death of a 19-year-old young mother. And the reason they were charged is this 19-year-old, Namili Henry, was locked up for 10 days on minor charges. The family couldn't afford the bond to get her out. And when she was in prison, the family told the prison officers, the officials, she has medical conditions. She must get her medication or she'll be in trouble. And apparently the arrest was over an argument. She wanted to see her daughter, who was in somebody else's care. Minor charges. And she died in prison because the prison officials ignored the comments about her medical condition. Now, if you're kind of wondering why we are seeing so much unbridled police violence and so little accountability, a lot of it comes on down to this guy named Dr. Lewinsky. And he is one of the people out there championing the idea that police should just shoot at the slightest provocation. And every time a police officer does that, Dr. Lewinsky can be counted on to be a witness for the defense, to say, absolutely, when this person starts to pull their hand out of the pocket, the officer is justified in shooting them dead here. Because if the officer waits to see a gun, the officer will be dead. I mean, that's ridiculous. But that's exactly what the police are being trained to think right now. If you sneeze, they'll shoot you. Could have been a biological weapon. Now, I'm a bit old-fashioned about such things. I grew up in a time where you actually had to be guilty of a crime before you got shot by the police. You weren't shot dead on the spot just because you might be on the verge of doing something bad. Clearly, mistakes get made in a circumstance like that. But it's now official, established police policy. My goodness. Alrighty. Let's talk about human-caused global warming. It is looking more and more like whatever agreement they're coming up with in Paris is not going to really be as significant as people were concerned. They're already backpedaling and saying, well, it's a declaration of political will. It's not legally binding. It's not a treaty. Congress doesn't have to ratify it. But everybody's out there still pounding on their various issues about human-caused global warming. And there's kind of an interesting mechanism we see in politics. A while back, everything that anybody wanted to do was declared to be for the children. We're going to photograph you and save your DNA. It's for the children. And then they kind of burned that out. Everybody can say, oh, for the children again. I don't want to hear it. And now it's changed to save the earth. Whatever we're going to do, it's going to save the earth. Because how can you be opposed to this new law saying we can spy on you? You know, do you want the earth to be destroyed? And the whole environmental movement got hijacked. And Dr. Patrick Moore, who was a co-founder of Greenpeace, quit the organization because he saw it being warped and mutated away from genuine concern about the environment into a tool of political policy. Science took a back seat to politics. Now the global warming people are saying that we can save the earth by going to an all-vegetarian diet because then we won't have all these cows putting out all the methane. And methane's a dangerous greenhouse gas. Yeah, it is, far more so than carbon dioxide. But methane doesn't persist in the atmosphere. It decomposes in the presence of oxygen into carbon dioxide and water. That's one of the reasons it's so hard to identify fracking contamination of water. You see all these fish die-offs and they just say, well, there wasn't any oxygen in the water. We don't know why. Yeah, we do. Methane percolating up from the fractures, from the fracking, goes through the water, absorbs the oxygen, produces more water, which is indistinguishable from the water that was already there, and carbon dioxide bubbles that go up into the atmosphere and make Al Gore nervous. But they're not interested in science and fact and truth. They're there to push the policies that they are paid to push. And now there's this campaign against meat. Meat is bad. No, it isn't. A totally vegetarian diet actually has harmful health effects. But I'm sure they've got a pill they're going to sell to make up for that. They're tinkering with our planet. They're tinkering with the biosphere for profit and for politics. And they're causing a huge amount of damage in the process. All right, we've got to take another break for news and commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And the corporate media is handling this whole thing in San Bernardino very recklessly. We mentioned before the CNN crew that broke into the apartment where the Farouks lived, took in a bunch of the family members and just trashed the place. And now, apparently, they're having to issue an apology because they were showing ID cards and information without it being blurred out. And they're saying, yes, it was inappropriate. But basically, the hard sell is on. The Farouks did it, the Farouks did it, the Farouks did it. And the more they keep selling that, the more obvious it is something is not adding up. We're going to start taking some phone calls here. We're going to start with Sherry in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon, Michael. Actually, I have two things. The first thing is about the San Bernardino and the shooters being found handcuffed and shot to death. I think somebody should tweet out, since I don't do social media, handcuffed, don't shoot. And,
that's a good one. I like that.
And but what you were talking about before the break about the methane gas from the animals, and if we just stopped eating them, all would be well. But the only way to prevent methane from being expelled from an animal is to eat them.
I think Ron White did something like that, where somebody was telling me, the cows are bad. They're putting out methane. Ron says, I'm eating the cows as fast as I can. Get me a cow, knock off the horns, wipe its butt, and serve it up.
Well, if I remember correctly from school, and I'm not sure that they taught me the truth necessarily, but isn't the cow a sacred animal in India?
Yes, it is. And it's caused a certain amount of inconvenience here. But the reality is that cows make a convenient target, but most methane is coming from the oceans, from deep crust microbes, and from termites. And we all know about termites. We don't want them to eat our houses. But the biomass of termites globally is 10 times the biomass of humans, and they put out huge amounts of methane. So you're not going to get rid of methane by getting rid of the cows. This is just somebody who's getting money from Veggie Patty Company to convince you that you're going to save the earth by eating their artificially created sausages rather than going on out and eating a real animal.
And just one last thing. We need to remember what Stacks put out most of the pollution, and it's in China. Where they have so many coal-fired electrical plants, and they're shutting ours down. But yet they just had a news story the other day about how it's so bad over there that you have to wear a mask and please stay indoors.
It is very bad over there, and it is because of the cold, but that's China's problem to deal with. And the United States does not have any right to go into anybody else's country and tell them how to live their lives. The U.S. government thinks they do. They believe they do. They're serving a higher purpose.
No, that's not my point, Mike. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that air pollution floats around the world. And so for Obama to say that we've got to shut down ours so China can have theirs, I say, what?
Well,
what's really happening?
What's really happening is the U.S. is trying to reassert control over the world's economy. They had it back in the days of Bretton Woods. It's slipping away from them. So they're trying a whole new idea of threat to the earth and a global carbon tax in order for the U.S. to go on telling other countries what economic development they may do and what economic development they may not do. Now, it is possible to solve these pollution problems with current technology, but nobody wants a solution because they're making so much money and political gain off of exploiting the problem itself. Now, the nuclear industry is coming on back and saying, it's time to look at nuclear, and it may be if it's handled properly, but whether it's nuclear or coal or oil, we see all these disasters happening because safety considerations are put under the control of some money junkie who says, well, we can save a little money and make the stockholders happy, if we lower the barriers and have only 2 fail-safe systems instead of 3. And inevitably, that's where the cascade starts to get everybody. And I like to put, as an example, the disaster in Japan, where there was one power station that was completely undamaged by the quake and tsunami because the engineer who designed and built it fought a one-man war to conform to what he thought were the proper safety standards. And unfortunately, he passed away without seeing his work being vindicated. But all the other power stations were damaged because somebody had said, we don't really need a 12-foot tidal wall. 8 is enough. We don't need to put the emergency generators, up on towers to keep them out of the water. That's just a lot of money that we're wasting for nothing. And we do see that. I'd like to see more work done on the thorium cycle reactors because thorium is a very common element in the Earth's crust, and you can't get bomb stuff out of it. But the U.S. government's love of uranium fission reactors is based in large part on the fact that you get bomb material out of them.
Right. Well, I've never heard of thorium. I'll have to look into that. But I say anything natural that we can use that is respectful to the environment we live in, I say hallelujah.
Well, China.
And aloha to you, Michael.
Aloha and mele kalikimaka. And as a final note, China reportedly has achieved break-even on hot fusion. And we should be looking at that as a possibility because what are you going to get out of that? Helium. And we're running out of helium. So, there are solutions, but too many politicians and corporate executives are happy making money just harping on the problems, and they don't want solutions. Just like nobody really wants a cure for cancer. They're making too much money off treatments for the illnesses. A cure would be a business disaster.
Absolutely, and they count on the ignorance of the people. And we're just not so ignorant anymore.
Well, don't tell them because they're still living in their dream world that we're all morons and sheep out here. Shari, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's Minnesota.
I'm sorry, Minnesota. I misread that.
Yeah.
My bad.
That's okay, Mike. That's fine. I had a real good thought here when your caller called about, the landlord. Or isn't that against the law to let anybody in to the a building?
Yeah, actually, it is. It is.
And the other comment I have, I was wondering there, with all these security since 9/11 and stuff, with video cameras, you can't go anywhere. And was that some kind of like a government or a public or whatever? You can't even walk into school and there's cameras all over taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this lady is 90 pounds, it's like going through a convenience store there, you would have like a a scale to the door that you're 5'2" or 5'1", and his reports there are 3 guys, very large men.
Yes.
Wouldn't the cameras catch that?
Well, they would.
Or is it
probably
another Sandy Hook where the cameras are not operating? Or not
probably the videos from inside the Inland Regional Center are wherever those GoPro cameras went as well.
Yeah. And I don't understand. I was watching the news with my mom. I brought her supper here tonight. And we have a local news, which is the NBC, which I always call nothing but crap. News.
I'll let you in on a secret. When I actually worked there, that's what we called it too.
You don't know what CNN is with me.
Well, let's keep it clean and polite. We don't want to lose the licenses for those few on-air affiliates we have.
I'm sorry.
All right. Well, listen.
No, like I said, I just said,
we got to take a break for commercials. I'll tell you what. I'm going to hold you over till after the commercial break. Don't hang up. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to Keith in Minnesota and just pick up where you left off. Keith, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost Keith. I'm going to put Keith back on hold, and we're going to switch over to Chris in Florida. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, as you mentioned before, that methane and water vapor are far more, according to the EPA, far worse, impactful of alleged global warming. And I want to point out that, according to the EPA's own website, that fluorinated gases are thousands to tens of thousands higher global warming potential than CO2. So what we have here is the phosphate mining companies especially emitting unsupervised fluorinated gases, heavy metals, and radioactive isotopes completely unmonitored into the air, into the water, and diluting their acidulated waste products and watering down with an unsupervised amount of water that they're drawing from the Florida aquifer here. That's Mosaic Phosphate Mining Company. And on the EPA's own website, it says that CO2 accounts for 82% of the greenhouse gases, while fluorinated gases account for 3%. Take 82% divided by 3%, you come out to 27.33, which is far less than thousands or tens of thousands, as the EPA's website says, is the global warming potential of CO2. So, what I want to tell folks is that you're not going to have any luck in trying to guilt trip me for exhaling and emitting CO2 when you're not going to even go after a seemingly invulnerable phosphate mining company giant like Mosaic, which dumps these deadly pollutants, which are far more persistent, and doesn't mean that these carbon Nazis will find me easy prey to guilt trip if they're not even going to consider Mosaic. And
you hit the issue right on the head. You're absolutely right. The carbon Nazis chose carbon dioxide specifically in order to be able to blame it on human activity. They didn't want to blame corporations. They didn't want to blame factories. They didn't want to blame mining companies or the oil industry. And they picked carbon dioxide because they could say that is all the cause of humans, which is not true. Human contribution to carbon dioxide is very minimal compared to volcanic activity, rotting foliage. The surface of the ocean produces huge amounts of carbon dioxide. And what even makes it more ridiculous, NASA has now finally admitted that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere does not act like a pane of glass in a greenhouse. In actual fact, it is acting as an atmospheric coolant because of the way it absorbs sunlight and then re-radiates it in different frequencies. So, it was complete nonsense from beginning to end, and you're absolutely right. The choice of carbon dioxide as the villain we were all supposed to be afraid of was to make humans feel guilty for destroying the earth in order to accept carbon taxation and draconian controls on their standard of living by some global environmental authority to save the earth. And it really is just nonsense. And this is how politicians love to work. They'll take something that happens naturally, declare it a crisis, demand money and funding for research, and then change of policy based on it. And if you go to my ClimateGate page, which is permanently linked up at the top of the main page in that little menu, and scroll down to the bottom, you will see all these quotes from the leading lights of the global warming movement who are saying it doesn't matter if it isn't true. We've got the chance to use this to bring about social change. We can bring about socialism. We can bring about control of the people. Just hardcore liberal agenda out there. And that's really what it was about. Carbon dioxide is not the worst pollutant in the atmosphere. It's one of the least offensive, but it was chosen in order to specifically go after ordinary people's wallets and obedience.
Well, it's a fluorofertilizer, as you know, and of course EPA declared pollutant. But what I want to urge folks is a call to action here at suncoastwaterkeeper.com on the tab called EPA v. Mosaic. And up until this coming Monday, December 7th, the EPA is taking commentary on the proposed $2 billion settlement with Mosaic Phosphate Mining Company because you can read their proposed letter, but it says that the settlement is a smoking gun and leaves no doubt as to Mosaic's criminal manufacturing practices, but does not identify a victim. We have heard, and every day we hear more of what we must, in the absence of epidemiological studies, call anecdotal reports of people with leukemia, lung cancer, COPD, blood disorders, skin lesions, breaking teeth and hair loss, tumors, and many more illnesses. And it goes on to, in their call of action, that they must conduct remediation in the 20-30-year time horizon of the trust account approach will expose another entire human generation to known disease-causing contaminants. This is completely unacceptable and a grave oversight on the part of the EPA and DOJ and a violation of the federal government's own policies on environmental justice. The phosphogypsum stacks must be remediated now before any more people have been put at risk.
Okay.
So that's just an excerpt, but before this upcoming Monday, put on the record your input to the EPA.
All right.
suncoastwaterkeeper.com.
Okay, all right. I got to let you go here. We're running out of time. The phone lines are full. Going to see if Keith is in Minnesota. Are you back on the line?
Yes, I was.
Okay. I kind of lost track of what you and I had been talking about. And we
were talking about the cameras and stuff there, how when the FBI gets into a certain place there, certain information disappears. I remember I emailed you a thing about our phone being blocked or dropped or cut off.
Yeah, we were seeing that. There's been a lot of stuff going on. I mean, my server's been under pretty much constant hacker attack, a lot of the independent media. But what's really weird about the FBI showing up, and now the FBI is saying, yes, this is a terrorism investigation, but the FBI didn't really have jurisdiction to be at the Inland Regional Center, because technically the FBI's jurisdiction is only when borders are crossed or the crime takes place on federal territory, federal soil, federally owned land, federal buildings. They don't really have jurisdiction, but they came in, take over. We're going to run this whole thing now, and every time they do that, it's a red warning flag that there's another cover-up in progress. So, Keith, got to let you go here. We're coming up on another.
Please, that's fine. You have a nice holiday season, you and Claire.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're coming up on another commercial break. We got 3 more phone calls waiting on the line. I will get to you all as soon as we come back from this next commercial break. And real quick, Patrick Moore, we were talking about him, co-founder of Greenpeace, left the organization, has a video out called What They Haven't Told You About Climate Change. It's linked to the front of What Really Happened. It is worth looking at because he's out there saying, look, climate is always changing. It's not driven by human activity. Stop being a sucker for Al Gore and the carbon Nazis. We'll be right back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We've got some callers on the line, been waiting very, very patiently. We're going to go to James in Tokyo. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Fine.
You're well. I'm very disgusted with you. You put Claire online all the time, and she looks so beautiful and healthy, and is trying to show donators like me that you're not feeding her enough, and she looks so svelte and beautiful.
Now, we're both trying to lose weight.
That's going to make me give another donation after the new year, and I don't appreciate that, Michael.
Feed the Starving Claire Fund. Is that the thing? No, she's working very hard to lose weight. So am I. Next spring when the body naturally sheds weight, We're both hoping to lose another 20 pounds each, but she's on an exercise program, and she's looking really, really good. I'm in agreement with you on that.
She's looking really good, and you could get kind of an R-rated site if you put her on, a little bit more. And
well, she's a little shy about things like that, and so she's a lady in the truest sense of the word. She's my favorite model, but most of the time when I'm trying to take pictures of her, all I can get is the back of her head.
Oh, Michael, I don't have any geopolitical comments today, but I want to talk about one thing that I messaged you maybe, I don't know, at least maybe over half a year ago about taking the radiation test in Ibaraki Prefecture, which is where I have a house right on the ocean.
Yes.
And I never sent you the results. I'd like to send you the results next week, and that's it. And I hope you can post them. I read a lot about like even sites like where you used to work, like on rents and stuff, like where they're like there's no fish in the sea and this and that. But it's kind of mixed, and I just want to send it to you and see what you have to say about it. Okay.
All right. I look forward to that. We can monitor.
And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Here.
And I hope Claire, enjoy yourself, and I'll talk to you after I send you the results.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Thank you for being so patient. What is on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Michael. Wanted to point out separation of church and state. What are menorahs being lit in Washington, D.C. instead of nativity scenes? The next one I want to point out is kind of hard to point out, but I have recently learned that...
Well, Wes, let's deal with that first one first here. First of all, I've noticed all over, nobody does nativity scenes anymore because those are the people we're bombing to steal their oil. And that's why nativity scenes, have kind of gone out of fashion. They're not for sale over at the Sam's Club and everything. As for the menorahs, it's basically, Israel's marking its turf. And every year we see the situation where Israel supporters, they want menorahs and dreidels everywhere, but if somebody puts up a nativity scene or something Christmassy, they get all upset and say that's not politically correct. And that's why I'm saying this year I'm saying Merry Christmas, and if you don't like it, coal in your sock. All
wow, right. That's good to hear. ZOG, Z-O-G, Zionist Occupational Government. Haven't heard that word used anywhere near often enough. Next, I wanted to point out, you keep talking about turning the keys to a nuclear war. I have just recently learned on YouTube that Hiroshima and Nagasaki, flowers and plants were growing within a month after the nuclear bomb exploded.
Yes, but they showed mutations.
Also, Galen Windsor, a man that helped put in nuclear power plants, worked at nuclear power plants all his life. You can see him on YouTube actually eating what is considered to be nuclear waste. He would even go in the front of the audience with a Geiger counter, put the Geiger counter.
Well, I'm sure glad I'm not, his life insurance underwriter or medical insurance underwriter. I mean, there is absolutely no question that ionizing radiation is very, very harmful. And I know there are a lot of nuclear industry activists who try and say, well, like Ann Coulter, a little radiation is good for you. And even the FDA and EPA are now saying, yeah, because the radiation from Fukushima is now showing up on the west coast of the Americas. But obviously that flies in the face of all the hard evidence that was gathered during the development of the nuclear technology and the nuclear weapons. And, so it sounds like a PR stunt. Anyway, Wes, got to let you go. We're running out of time, and I got to get to another phone call from Wally in Texas who called back in, and I'm sorry I didn't get to you before. What's on your mind?
It's not Obama. It's the teleprompter, stupid.
I'm sorry. What do we?
How about? That's a very profound statement, Michael. It's not Obama, it's the teleprompter, stupid. Don't you remember Bill Clinton and the economy, stupid? Don't you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that part. But, it's Obama because he chooses to read the teleprompter and not be his own person. But it is humorous what you're saying. It is funny the way you put it.
Yeah, I mean, anything they put up there, the idiot says it. And if he's not got the teleprompter, then he's live in Paris. And look how he blows it.
Yeah, that is certainly true. He's not really a great extemporaneous speaker, is he?
He's a hollow suit. I've heard it many times.
Yeah, well, most modern American politicians are. There are exceptions like Ron Paul and Donald Trump and Cynthia McKinney. And again, I have to tip my hat to Virginia State Senator Black and Tulsi Gabbard, who are out there speaking their own mind about what's going on.
Their numbers are growing, thank God.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you. Have a great weekend.
All right, same to you here. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and close the phone lines for the rest of the day here because I got a bunch of breaking stories that we need to get to before we get to the end of our Kaahumanu Friday show. First of all, speaking of here in Hawaii, somebody just sent me this story, which I was actually unaware of. Over on the other side of the island is Kaneohe Bay. It's very, very beautiful. When Claire and I first moved here, we lived over in Kaneohe, and we really enjoyed being over there. And apparently, the water tends to be very turbid. It's hard to see there. They've discovered a PBY Catalina flying boat that was apparently shot down during the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it's been sitting there on the bottom of the bay all these years, and a team of archaeologists just found it. And it's one of the cool things about being on a small island like this. All the history that happened real close. And I remember it was only a few years ago when the University of Hawaii's Marine Research Unit found the sunken mini-sub, the Japanese mini-sub that had been fired on by the USS Ward, half an hour before the Japanese airstrikes began. And there was this big stink where the Ward's report of a Japanese submarine in their patrol zone was ignored. And had they declared an alert at that point and gotten everybody to battle stations, the outcome of the Pearl Harbor attack would have been very, very different. Now, was it just somebody was being stupid, or were there certain people in the command chain who were aware that Roosevelt needed a bloody attack on Pearl Harbor to trick the U.S. into war on Japan? I obviously go with the latter theory. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Final segment of our Kaahumanu Friday program before we get off into the weekend, which hopefully will be relaxing. But I wouldn't bet any money on it. Now, yesterday, the Washington Post came out with a very honest article about gun violence in the United States of America. As you know, the gun grabbers are seizing on San Bernardino to paint a picture of the U.S. as the wild, wild west where everybody is shooting everybody dead in the streets, and that's why they got to take the guns away. But the reality is, gun crime in the United States has been on the decline for 20 years. Except for the high-profile media festival shootings in the gun-free zones. Those are on the increase. And remember, the Inland Regional Center, where the mass shooting took place yesterday, was a gun-free zone. And I'm sure when these three white guys in their tactical outfits and their military weapons marched in through the door, somebody was in there saying, "Wave the sign at them! Wave the sign at them! They'll stop shooting!" Do you know the Department of Homeland Security has actually issued a booklet for schools, what to do if there's a shooter situation in your school? And they actually recommend teachers try and stab the shooter with their scissors. They actually recommend. It's not a joke. It's not a joke. That's the official recommendation of the government. Pick up the scissors and try and stab him. Or her, as the case may be. They really are getting bizarre with some of this stuff. Apparently over in Boston, somebody left a suitcase next to a car belonging to the Department of Homeland Security. So they called in the Boston Police Bomb Squad, gently moved it away from the DHS vehicle and blew it up. It was full of clothing. No explosives. Now, under the so-called Reform Freedom Act, which was recently passed, you've all been told that your Fourth Amendment right to privacy has been restored. You don't need to use encryption. The government isn't peeking at you anymore. And yet, apparently from various leaked documents, nothing has really changed. The NSA can spy on anybody that they want, and they don't care about the Fourth Amendment of the law. They've been doing it since the 1980s in the Echelon program. I question the myth that they can spy on everybody, but there's no question they can spy on anybody that they feel like. And we're not going to have our Fourth Amendment right to privacy back until all those NSA data centers are shut down, the computers sold off for surplus. I can always use another hard drive around here. The buildings turned into housing for all these illegal immigrants and refugees pouring into the country, and everybody who violated our Constitution gets a good thick coat of tar and feathers. Then we'll have our privacy back. But as long as the government has the capability to spy on you, they will use it. Greece's economy minister is once again under investigation for failing to declare his assets. Politics and corruption. For those of you who wondered, this is why they're combined as one tag at the website. Politics and corruption. Now, apparently, there's an allegation that Turkey is preventing the delivery of Russian helicopters to Iraq. And basically, the mechanism by which they're doing this is refusing Russia permission to ferry those helicopters over Turkish soil to deliver them to Iraq. Now, helicopters are wonderful things, and Russian helicopters are very, very good. When that whole mess in Afghanistan was going on, the Mujahideen used to say, we're not afraid of the Russians, but we are afraid of their helicopters. But they're short range, and to fly around to get where they need to go, it's going to be an inconvenience, but I'm pretty sure Putin's going to go ahead and do just that to get the helicopters in there. According to Lebanese politician Masaryk Rodrik Khoury, Turkey is the main sponsor of the terrorists in Syria, in large part because Turkey is buying stolen Syrian oil from ISIS and reselling it. They're getting it for about half the current world market value, which is why global oil and gas prices are still in decline, causing economic hardship around the world. And there's a story that just showed up in RIF.com. There's been yet another video surfacing showing Turkish uniformed troops being all buddy-buddy with Islamic State jihadists. And don't forget, yesterday we were talking about how Erdogan's son, there are some pictures that surfaced of Erdogan's son having a very nice, luxurious dinner with ISIS leaders. So far, Saudi Arabia has spent about $60 billion, with a B, in their aggression against Yemen to convince the people of Yemen that they should go back to living under U.S. foreign puppet rule. $60 billion. I have a sneaking suspicion Saudi Arabia isn't picking up the tab on that. I give you 3 guesses who's going to get stuck with the bill for this one, and the first 2 don't count. Now, in the rush to report on San Bernardino and how the stock market miraculously soared back into the stratosphere today, little economic statistic that didn't get a lot of coverage in the corporate media, the number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits is going up, which is rather amazing because this is the time of year when retailers are hiring their temporary help for the holidays. And in past years, during a healthy economy, at this point in the year, new applications for unemployment benefits tend to go down, but they're going up. Something not quite working there. Now, not too long ago, we ran a story pointing out the fact that despite its pretensions of being a part of the U.S. government, The Centers for Disease Control is actually a privately owned corporation with strong financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And when you pair that with the revelation that came out from Dr. William Thompson, who was one of the authors of the CDC report saying that there was no link between vaccinations and autism, that the whole report was a fraud, it makes a lot of sense. CDC is not there to worry about the health of the American people. Like every other component of the medical industrial complex, it's there to protect the profits. It's there to support corporate interests. It's fascism. Now then. A lot of people at Monsanto's current research triangle park are celebrating because Monsanto has announced they're closing their research triangle park research and development site. And a lot of people are very concerned about what's been going on, potential accidents, but they're relocating to St. Louis. Now, interestingly enough, we were talking earlier in the week about the dengue fever outbreak down on the Big Island. And yesterday, I was looking at that, and I was sort of musing about the possibility that because dengue fever had been developed as a biological weapon, including the mosquito that carries it, back in the 1950s and 1960s, maybe somebody was messing around with that, and they made a mistake. And then today on the radio, I hear a news story that the Department of Defense has granted a contract to a research company here in Hawaii to develop a vaccine for dengue fever to protect American troops in war. So I'm going to be chasing that one down here over the weekend, and hopefully we'll have a few more details about that on our Monday program. Meanwhile, final story of the day over at NN News. Record levels of Fukushima radiation detected off the West Coast. Massive plume stretches for more than 1,000 miles. It's going to be everywhere eventually. And that's just the reality. They can't take it back. They can't take it back. They can't fix it. There's the music. Time for us to have a nice, relaxing weekend here. We'll see you all on Monday back here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, thanks to everybody calling their local talk radio stations and joining them at GCNlive.com. We need more on-air affiliates to get the word out and stop this war before we all have mushroom clouds in our front yards. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.